Hello everybody, this is the error analysis of your reflective report. So here we go, starting with the first sentence. I have not learned to write the academic sentence in the past. What's wrong here is the use of the article the, because what you mean is that you have not learned to write academic sentences in general, not one particular sentence. And because you mean sentence in general and not one particular sentence, you usually leave out the or you need to leave out the article. So what you end up with is, I have not learned to write academic sentences, plural, in the past. So moving on to the second sentence. I have enjoyed various tasks provided in the courses. There's two things wrong with this sentence. First of all, various tasks. This is similar to the previous sentence. You mean the tasks that were specific for the course. So in this case, you do mean specific tasks. So in this case, you do need an article. So that's the first thing that needs to be changed. And also courses. The word courses is not appropriate here because the academic writing course was one course, and the course consists of a number of lessons or classes. So course, because you only took one course, needs to be singular. And like I said, the course consisted of a number of classes. So what you end up with is, I've enjoyed the various tasks provided in the course. Next sentence. I have learned to improve the tennis skill of the customers. The problem here is that skill needs to be plural. And it's always difficult to decide whether to make skill singular or plural. Generally speaking, when an activity just requires one skill, you keep it singular. For instance, knowing how to write, for instance, is a skill. But when you're talking about tennis, in order to play tennis well, you need a number of skills. You need good strokes, you need good footwork, you need to be mentally and physically fit, and so on. And so being a good tennis player requires a number of skills. So that's why it makes sense to make tennis skills plural. So what you end up with is, I have learned to improve the tennis skills of the customers. 4 points are explained below. The choice of words appropriate for the topic, formal sentences are required, the order of the paragraph is rigid, and proper punctuation, spelling, and articles uses is required. There's quite a few things. There are quite a few things wrong with this sentence. First of all, 4 points, plural. I forgot to underline it. Sorry, but it needs to be plural. But the main problem, there are two main problems here. First of all, that is that after the colon, the sentence doesn't have a what's called a parallel structure. Because if you add things, you make a list, each item on the list needs to have a similar sentence structure, and that's not the case here. Also, the descriptions of the 4 things that you promised to discuss, it's quite wordy, it's too long. So what you should try to do is find key nouns to describe the activities. It's not always possible, but that's what you should go for. So keep it shorter, and it should have a parallel structure. Okay, so what you could do is write something like this. 4 points S are explained below. Word choice, formality, paragraph order, and proper punctuation, spelling, and article use. So now all 4 items on the list have a similar structure. You may wonder why the semicolon instead of a simple, instead of a comma. Sorry. The reason for that is because of the last bit, punctuation, spelling, and article use. If I had used a regular comma, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the 4 items on the list, because people that read the sentence would think that punctuation, comma, spelling would be 2 different things. So there would be 5 items on the list. For this reason, to set the 4 items apart, you use a semicolon instead of a regular comma. Each week we wrote an article based on the writing skills we learned. The word based on is not the appropriate word here, because you didn't actually base your writing skills on something. You used your writing skills. You would use based on to talk, for instance, talk about a topic. For instance, you can base a report on a book that you've read. In other words, you write about the book. But because this is something, it's a skill that you apply, you need a different word. So what you could do is, each week we wrote an article to practice or use the writing skills that we had learned. There's also a tense mistake here. You need to use had learned here because there are 2 events happening here in the past. You wrote the article, and before you wrote the article, you learned the skills. So that means if 2 events happen in the past, the one closest to the present gets a simple past tense, and the other one, so learned in this case, gets a past perfect tense, so had learned. To prepare the students for the demands of academic writing, precise instructions were given. The word "the demands" is not the right word here, because usually demands is used when talking about people, what people want. And of course, academic writing is not a person, so it can't really have demands. What the person who wrote this meant was to prepare the students for the requirements of academic writing. In other words, the things that the writer needs to do to, if he or she wants the piece of writing to qualify as academic writing. Maybe you can call them guidelines or something like that. So what you end up with is, to prepare the students for the requirements of academic writing, precise instructions were given. I have not considered my research plan deeply. To consider deeply is kind of is not a term. It's kind of awkward. It's not widely used. I think the person who wrote this confused it with something like to have deep understanding. So to understand something thoroughly, but you don't usually consider something deeply. It's awkward a little bit. So what you could do instead is, I have not thoroughly considered my research plan, meaning that you haven't really thought about it in enough detail, because I think that's what this person wanted to say. In the academic writing, using formal grammar and style is required. The person who wrote this used the. If that were the appropriate thing to do, so using the article the, he or she would be talking about one specific piece of writing, like one specific report, for instance. That's not the case here. What's meant here is the skill of academic writing in general. because that's the case, you don't really need an article. So in academic writing, using formal grammar and style is required. The most important thing obtained from this academic writing lecture is, and so on. What's wrong here is the word lecture. What the person who wrote this got wrong is the difference between lecture and a course. A course is usually a series of lessons, of a series of lectures, and the lectures together, for instance, each week, together they make a course. So the lecture usually refers to individual lessons, and a course refers to a series of lessons. So the most important thing obtained from this academic writing course is, and so on.